All right, good morning and afternoon and evening, everyone. I'm Seth Enoka, a Principal Industrial Incident Response Consultant at Dragos, where we safeguard civilization by preventing and responding to incidents in critical infrastructure and other industrial environments. So I'm going to talk to you today about two seemingly unrelated topics: contemporaneous note-taking for digital forensics and Dachshunds. So, of which I have two, Henry and Daisy. They'll be showing up at various points throughout the talk. At first glance, I imagine you're wondering what these two topics have in common, but I can assure you and aim to demonstrate that there is a connection. Both of the topics require attention to detail and a methodical approach. So let's start with contemporaneous notes, contemporaneous note-taking for digital forensics. So contemporaneous note-taking, henceforth referred to as note-taking, or just notes, just for my own sake, means taking notes as events are unfolding. So this is important in digital forensics because you must document each step of your process, including the tools and the techniques that you used, the data that you recovered, and any relevant timestamps or metadata. So by keeping detailed notes, you can demonstrate your methodology and prove that the evidence hasn't been tampered with. More on this in a minute. Now let's talk about Dachshunds. So Dachshunds, also known as sausage dogs, are generally known for their long bodies and their tiny little legs, which is both hilarious and adorable. It may not look like it, but like so many breeds, they're hounds, and they were originally bred for hunting. These ones for hunting badgers and other small animals. Today, they're more commonly kept as pets. Mine definitely still demonstrate that killer instinct. You know, they hunt each other and they hunt my partner and I all the time. It's kind of difficult to sit down without immediately being accosted by a dog. But despite their small size, Dachshunds are known for their very large, very big personalities, and also for their loyalty and their devotion to their owners. It's actually really sad when sausages are rehomed for any reason because they never forget their first family. They're also really great companions as a result of that, though. It's really common for us, you know, of a nighttime to be sitting watching TV with a dog curled up either kind of as close as they can get beside you or definitely on your lap because they love to be close to you. So what do Dachshunds have to teach us about forensics and note-taking? Well, just like digital forensics and incident response, taking care of a Dachshund requires attention to detail. Dachshunds are prone to certain health issues like back problems and obesity, which are often actually interrelated issues. So it's really important that you keep track of their diet, their exercise, and any medical issues that might come up. There are several genetic disorders that they and their parents have to be tested for, and the back issues just kind of stem from activities like jumping. You really have to stop them from doing that as much as you can. So to that end, they love ramps, right? We have a ramp so that they can walk up and down onto the couch rather than jumping up. And you might think that they can't jump very high, but you'd be wrong. They can definitely jump the 2 feet or so up onto the couch when that ramp isn't there. I think they can jump something like 2.5 times their height, typically. The same detail-oriented approach can be applied to your forensic notes, and for similar reasons. Attention to detail means writing everything down, or at least the most pertinent details of a case. Details of your process are also really crucial to write down, and the best way to do that is as it happens. Note-taking is an art, and it's a critical part of being a security profession. They're almost always the basis of successful investigations. So regardless of whether the task being performed is proactive, like a threat hunt or a compromise assessment, or is reactive, like incident response, the nature of cybersecurity kind of necessitates diligent note-taking. I really can't tell you the number of times that I have been saved by my forensic notes because my memory is just awful. And that is a hard learned lesson too. I definitely didn't start out being good at note-taking. It definitely took time to develop. It's like a muscle. You really need to exercise it constantly to make it strong. Having a methodical approach to note-taking is definitely key to success. If you are the kind of person who notes down vet appointments, doses of medications, allergies, or dietary requirements on like scraps of paper, and then throws them in a drawer. Dog ownership may be a challenge for you. It's much better on several dimensions to develop and use some sort of system or some workflow to maintain your puppy's health. Likewise, there are several benefits to note-taking in forensic investigations, besides just making up for my bad memory. Taking a methodical, repeatable approach to forensics and note-taking makes your workflow scalable and less prone to error. It becomes repeatable by you and by others. Another analyst should really be able to follow your process based on your notes and arrive at the same conclusions. If not, there's probably something wrong with your workflow or with your notes. Anyway, by keeping a detailed record of their care and any issues that arise, you ensure that your Dachshund stays healthy and happy. They're also wicked smart, so any lapse in attention is going to cost you either, a sock or a piece of furniture or just a run while you try to catch them. Luckily, they do have very little legs, so that gives you a bit of a handicap. The other thing to keep notes of is allergies. So Dachshunds and other dogs as well are allergic to some really strange things. Did you know, for example, they can't have grapes or avocado? I think most people are aware these days that they can't have chocolate, but I was surprised to learn about all the other things that they can't have. So you can see how taking notes can literally save a life. Keeping a detailed record, both for the dogs and for forensics, is really important because those notes are often relied upon like months or years after an engagement has completed, months or years after the fact. Your notes can take many forms, including physical, electronic, video, or photo. Given the varied ways that we can record information contemporaneously, there's really no excuse for not taking notes. And keeping a detailed record, if nothing else, helps you to write that killer report at the end of the day. So let's dig into that a little deeper. So why should you take notes? We've already covered a few reasons, but let me tell you more. I've said it before, but it definitely bears repeating. Flawed or inaccurate recollection creates considerable risk, not just for you as an analyst, but for your employer, any allegedly guilty party, and definitely your clients or your stakeholders as well. If the veracity of your findings is later questioned and found to be wanting, that's not a good idea. That's not ideal. If you don't take notes and you rely on your memory, any misremembering of key facts and details is going to lead to a very different and often incorrect outcome for your case. As forensicators, we have to be held to a very high ethical standard, and I don't think you can truly do that if you're not taking notes of things like the actions that you're taking, as well as the evidence that you're discovering. Especially when you work in a team, it's essential to take notes not only during those investigations where you're doing the DFIR equivalent of archaeology, but during incident response activities as well. Even proactive activities have the potential to turn into or form part of a DFIR investigation. Where that happens, it's much better to have as much information as possible related to the activities that you are doing that led to the need for DFIR, right? If I'm doing a threat hunt and I discover something super malicious, that sucks because you never want the output of a threat hunt to be an incident, right? But that obviously needs to be reported to the client ASAP. And having taken notes up until that point is going to put us in a much better position to respond than if we had to go and repeat, some or all of that analysis because we hadn't written anything down. As it is in forensics, so it is with dog ownership. If you have a partner with whom you share dog rearing responsibilities, you both need to be on the same page when it comes to training your fuzzy friends. The only way to do that is to note down what works and what doesn't when training your dogs, which is actually often more about training the humans than the animals. You both need to know the signals, the tools, and the techniques that you're using to train them. Otherwise, training will take longer, or it just may not stick at all. The problem that my partner and I had is we have different vocabularies, not just in terms of the words that we use, but the body language as well. So we needed to synchronize on what specific hand movements and gestures we were going to use with the dogs. Otherwise, all four of us were going to get very confused and frustrated. So it's important to work as a team. Taking notes enables you to improve your processes or your training methods over time. Attempting to reproduce results without notes is very difficult, as circumstances are very difficult to replicate. Perfection is not possible. So your goal should be, as individuals and as teams, continuous improvement. 1% better per day is better than 0. Notes of any kind are particularly useful during lessons learned exercises or post-incident activity. They can be used to identify issues which arose last time, or a pattern of challenges over time, which should then feed into process improvement. Having notes relating to how issues encountered can be resolved is useful as well for knowledge sharing between team members and across different business units. Additionally, if you have a team member who's unavailable and they're going to be away for some time, any other member of the team should be able to follow their notes and continue working on that engagement or with the dogs in that person's absence. That type of transparency enables you to work as efficiently as possible and is going to result in better outcomes overall. Seeing how critical note-taking is, taking notes must be an organizational policy, and it has to apply to all analysts. This is not a guideline, it is not a recommendation, it's a requirement. Every analyst must take notes. If you're not taking notes, you're not doing your job as a security professional or as a dog owner. Your notes protect both the note taker and their stakeholders in the event of negative outcomes, adverse outcomes, or legal action resulting from actions taken or not taken. Moreover, an analyst being able to refer to their own notes in court or during a deposition or any similar situation is invaluable. The closer to the action that the notes are created and the more detailed that they are, the more credible they are. And the more credible the analyst is, right? Or they are likely to be considered. And this isn't to say that it's just the frontline customer-facing consultants either, right? Like line supervisors and leaders should likewise be taking notes and coming up with questions and writing all that down during cadence calls and update meetings, etc. So note-taking, just like security, is everyone's responsibility. A note on training. Responsible dog owners must train their dogs for the dog's own safety in the first instance, like keeping them from running into a busy street or eating something that they really shouldn't, but also the safety and the well-being of those around them. A dog, it probably bears saying, is an obligation, not a gift. I think they're much like children in that way. Don't get one if you can't commit to training them, especially a breed that's as headstrong and intelligent as a Dachshund. The way that you train your dog will also depend on what motivates them and probably what motivates you as well. In a lot of cases, that's going to be food, which is super easy because you just give them treats when they demonstrate the behavior that you want them to perform. If your dog is not food motivated, which is not common amongst sausage dogs, you'll have to find something else that works. In a lot of cases, like I mentioned before, training dogs is really actually more about training the humans than it is about training the animals. The same goes for training your analysts or yourself. Taking good forensic notes is not an inherent skill. It's something that has to be taught and it has to be learned and it has to be practiced. Often that's going to be through trial and error. So my method of taking notes might not work for you, right? And vice versa. For example, I just cannot get my head around mind maps or Jira or Kanban, just visual types of tools. My brain just doesn't work that way. Even though my brain is kind of all over the place most of the time, I really have to have a list structure for my notes to make them make sense, at least make sense to me. Other analysts love mind maps, right, and other types of charts. That gives them a structure that works with the way that their brain organizes concepts. So what you'll find is that your process for taking notes, in addition to your forensic workflow, will probably evolve and improve over time, as long as you keep practicing it, keep working that muscle, finding what works for you and what doesn't. Sometimes you'll end up going backwards, right? When a new tactic or a new technique you're trying out doesn't pay off. But again, we're really aiming for continuous improvement, not perfection. story time. In the past, I've come across security professionals who do not believe in taking notes at all. That opinion kind of seems to persist for several reasons, like the perception that there's just no time while performing digital forensics and incident response to stop and take notes. But taking notes is just as important as any other tool in your toolkit. If, for whatever reason, you can't take notes during your investigation, taking notes of what you did as soon as practical after the fact is definitely the best approach. Human memory, at least in my experience, is as volatile as RAM or worse. So the more time that passes, the less accurate your notes and therefore your report will be. So back to the story. I once worked in a team where there was no culture of taking notes. I eventually got into not an argument, I guess, but more of a disagreement with one colleague in particular who made that argument that there is no time to take notes while I'm working on an investigation. I argued back that, of course, there's time. There are very few legitimate reasons not to take notes because there's always a certain amount of progress bar watching during forensics that you can repurpose for note-taking. Anyway, long story short, I ended up writing a paper for SANS, extolling the virtues of note-taking, and they published it. And he had to change his argument. Maybe not his mind, but he had to change his argument. So that's probably the most petty thing that I've ever done, and I'm still weirdly proud of it. Switching back to the doggos for a minute and thinking about training, I think it's important to start early. The earlier you start your training, the more deep-seated that training is going to be. The more ingrained it will be in their behavior day to day. We started taking our puppies to training something like 12 weeks, and it was 12 weeks only because they had to have all their vaccinations and things before they could be around other dogs. Otherwise, it probably would have been earlier. Even though they got those vaccinations, they still got doggo COVID pretty much immediately, but that's another story. The other piece of this is often regularity. I have no chance of staying focused on training for even reasonably short periods of time. So because of my limits, I can only train the dogs for like 10 minutes at a stretch. The dogs probably have a similar attention span, to be honest. I also just don't have the patience to put up with a dog not picking up what I'm putting down for extended periods of time. So for us, that means training in short bursts multiple times a day, which is easier to manage in a lot of ways. You just train them incidentally, like when you give them their food, when you let them out of whatever area you have designated for them, and when people visit or you take them to visit people. So the point is early and often is kind of the point. And having said that, that's exactly how you should approach training yourself and others to take notes as well. It's very rarely going to be an extended thing. That's more the report writing side of things. Note-taking should be short, it should be sharp bursts, a few minutes at a time at the extreme end, right? Sometimes you might spend like 10 seconds taking a note about what you're doing, copy-pasting a command and its output from a terminal. Sometimes it might be a few minutes highlighting a hypothesis that you've developed or proof of a hypothesis or something like that. Regardless of what it is, though, just like with the dogs, the idea is early and often. The hard part is starting. So once you've started, it's definitely much easier to continue. And it's also much easier to take notes as you go in small increments rather than banking them up for a few hours or for a day and then trying to retrace your steps to fill out your notebook at the end of your analysis day, for example. And going back to that teamwork piece as well, if your team can view your notes in real time rather than waiting for you to write them up, you're going to be more efficient and certainly more effective as a cohesive team. Now, I know I've been bagging on about how you have to take notes as soon as possible for a while, but there are definitely times when you can't take notes because you legitimately aren't allowed to. So when I worked in the Middle East, there were clients who wouldn't let pen or paper in the room, and you had to lock your phone outside in a locker, like a skiff, if you're familiar with that concept. And that's fine. Some of us work in those environments, sure. I understand that. What I would say, though, is you should still keep notes. Not necessarily as detailed or in-depth as you otherwise would, but you should at least keep something that you can refer to refresh your memory about what you did on a certain day. If you're performing analysis for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks and you need to remember when you analyzed, a specific device that's part of your engagement, it's probably a good idea to have at least that high-level, non-identifying detail noted down somewhere. Anonymize it, make it abstract, but still manage your situational awareness in case something goes wrong. There are several ways that you can choose to take notes, and which method you choose will be highly individual and tailored to your specific requirements. And they all kind of have pros and cons. The most common way is to simply write things down, right? In some cases, that means a physical notebook, means having a journal of some kind. And physical notes are great for those tactile individuals among us, right? And an actual notebook gives us, or gives you a lot of freedom in how you take your notes. So you can use that list structure that we talked about, noting down things in order as you see them, or write down actions as you take them. Or if you're so inclined, they can be much more free form, like mind map or something similar, which is often much more difficult to achieve in a digital format. There are solutions, but they're a bit more bespoke. Alternatively, there's obviously the electronic version of note-taking. There are umpteen apps out there that allow you to take notes, and I mean things like OneNote, Confluence, SharePoint to an extent, Evernote, Joplin, so on. These are great for collaboration, right? Physical notes do not lend themselves to collaboration or teamwork at all. They kind of only exist in your physical space, and sharing them with coworkers isn't super easy or straightforward, especially in real time. Even worse, if your handwriting, like mine, gets no practice and is therefore pretty much illegible to anyone but you. Online tools, on the other hand, are definitely designed with that purpose in mind in most cases. But herein lies the issue. Online notes, electronic notes, open you up to risk. Anything that is stored on a computer is kind of fair game for your adversary. So you need to put some walls up. You need some mitigating controls to prevent access to what is likely very sensitive data. The same is somewhat true of physical notes, right? We tell people not to write down their passwords because they can be easily pilfered or otherwise observed. And the same is also true of forensic notes. But at least with electronic notes, you can kind of implement access controls and prevent people without a need to know from accessing them in the first place. Moving on from written notes, you can also, in some cases, have the option of audio or video. I know some analysts who prefer to dictate their notes, for example. It's kind of a method of a bygone era. You see the noir detectives speaking into a dictaphone or some type of recording device, and that's not so common these days. Surprisingly, those devices do still exist, but most of us just use our phones, right? The same rules apply though. Beware of apps that might be vulnerable, either accidentally or on purpose. TikTok. It's the same deal with video, although there are additional considerations there as well. So the great thing about computers is that they have the functionality like screen recording available to us. So instead of copy pasting those terminal commands and their output into your notes, whether that's digital or worse, writing them down manually in your physical notebook, you can just record your screen while you do that analysis. So that's a super easy way to maintain a record. Trouble is, you record everything, right? So if your analysis machine also has like your email, your calendar open for whatever reason, or even just your desktop icons, your desktop file icons, be careful not to capture what is, again, probably sensitive information. You really don't want to be handing that over to a client or to a court or to anyone else for that matter. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is a story from a friend of a friend, if you're performing your analysis on a Friday afternoon, because it's always 4 p.m. on Friday when you get the call, right? And you might have had an adult beverage because it's the end of the week. Not recommended, not saying that we've done it, but make sure that that isn't captured in the video that you're taking of your analysis of the mobile phone or the other device or whatever you're forensicating. It's not a good look and kind of undermines your authority as an expert if you do end up going to court. So I'm sure that there are other methods that people have used before, things like text messages, email, etc., to take notes as and when things happen. I'd argue that those are not great tools to use for forensics and incident response. They're just not secure. If you're messaging someone about your pets, go nuts, right? Include photos, include videos, all that information. People love to see cute animals, and there are none cuter than yours. Just Don't do it with forensics. Last point on this slide, integrity matters. So firstly, when we're talking about dogs, they have very good, very long memories. If you treat them poorly, they're going to remember that and they'll never forgive you. So don't break their trust by mistreating them, because you'll never earn that back. It's different to an extent with humans, right? Because if we do something wrong, intentionally or not, we can usually just make a sincere apology and things kind of go back to normal, especially after time passes. Not so much with dogs. They hold a grudge. You need to treat them with the love and respect that they deserve. I'd probably go so far as to say that this extends to that thing I'm sure most of us have done, where we pretend to throw the ball, right? Don't do that. Again, integrity matters. So when we talk about our forensic notes, we need to determine how to maintain their integrity as well. Integrity in this context means that they can be trusted to be a true and accurate representation of what you did and what you saw. Notes that have no measurable integrity have diminished value. And if you have no discernible integrity, then your expert opinion likewise has no value. The way to solve this is to write accurate notes in the first instance, but also to use some kind of write once method that can't be altered or adulterated once those notes are taken. You really want these things to be written in stone rather than jelly. When taking notes in a physical notebook, for example, you'd use a permanent pen, not an erasable pencil or a crayon. Alterations really have to be self-evident and subject to confirmation. You need to be able to tell when a change was made. The biggest challenge with write-once record-keeping methods is that all of those smaller changes that we would like to make, like grammar and spelling and just general corrections, can't be made. In most cases, if your tool or your solution has some kind of auditable mechanism for making amendments, this isn't really a problem. Alternatively, you can make amendments or adjustments in a separate note and attach that as an appendix, or append it as errata. And what that means when taking notes electronically is you have to use a tool which maintains strict versioning control, like Confluence, like Jira, or similar. Any system of note-taking that's auditable and keeps track of changes made after the fact can be used to successfully maintain the integrity of your notes and your integrity as a forensicator. If you opt for physical notes, there are a couple of things that you can do to ensure their integrity. Ensure legibility, right? If I can't tell the difference between swan and swindle in your notes, that's not going to help me come to the same conclusion that you did. Take notes in pen, seems pretty straightforward, and don't use correction fluid or whiteout. Instead, use a single strike through of notes that you want to amend or remove so that that original note is still visible underneath. Additionally, note why you struck it out, right? You also never want to tear pages out of a physical notebook. Missing pages look sketchy AF, so don't do it. Again, strike through pages if you have to, and you really don't want to leave large blank spaces where avoidable. It's all too easy for more notes to be added after the fact without detection if there's just space for those to be written down. One key note-taking recommendation when writing down your thoughts or assessments of what happened in a case is to use complete sentences. It's always best to use complete sentences. If you have like 4 IP addresses written down, and that's all you wrote down, right? You come back to it the next day, you probably aren't going to remember the context of why you wrote them down or where you found them. I certainly wouldn't. Complete sentences often provide adequate context to piece together the story. When you're taking notes, you're really not focused on the hypothesis that you might have during that investigation. It's not that I don't write those down, right? Thinking about ways to test the hypotheses that I have, that's definitely part of the process. Even in the middle of incidents as kind of a mini hunt to see if my hypothesis is valid. But my notes are really about, these are the things that I'm seeing. These are the things that I can tell the adversary did. These are the artifacts that I'm collecting and how I'm collecting them. And then these are the actions that I'm taking, complete with things like screenshots or command listings and their outputs. It's really important that the lead incident responder as well is responsible for one thing. And that's not necessarily a timeline of the event. It's a timeline of the actions being taken by the incident response team. Because I, as the incident lead, if I'm the lead responder, I need to be able to say who was assigned something, when they reported that it was done, and then where that work product lives. You also don't want to go into extraneous detail in the body of your notes. I know that I've said we should be recording as much as possible, but what I mean by that is if I dump like a megabyte or 10 megabytes of strings out of something, like out of a piece of malware, I don't then put all of that data, all of those strings in my notes, right? I keep that as a file somewhere. I make a note about it, like where that is, but all of that data is like appendix type material when you get to the report writing stage. At a minimum, your notes should include things like actions taken, including the time and the place that they were taken, commands that were run, and their output, obviously, and results and findings. So after the fact, again, any analyst should be able to follow your notes and arrive at those same results and conclusions. Timestamping of notes is also good forensic practice. It allows you to identify any activity on a system which can be attributed to you rather than the user. At the least, note the start and end time of an examination. Your notes are going to be used after the engagement to justify the time spent if you're a consultant. So any gaps in coverage, like breaks and things, should also be covered, should also be recorded, providing a really holistic view of when actions were taken. If the event or the incident encompasses multiple locations, note where those notes were taken. And that includes, for instance, on site with the client, at your headquarters, and any other location that's involved. Moreover, that allows evidence locations to be verified after the fact. Pertinent details like evidence names, numbers, descriptions, and other important details really have to be included in your notes as well, or in a separate evidence collection sheet or chain of custody. Findings and observations should be recorded as and when they arise and should be stated in a matter-of-fact manner. So we're not talking about hyperbole, we don't want any guesses, we're not talking about writing down conjecture. Include all of the known information related to the findings that you're coming across. That'll include where information was found, the time and date that it was found, and the user details that are relevant to it, as well as the software or the methods that you used. Do not record inferences and assumptions except to provide context for the actions you are taking. Hypotheses and facts confirming or refuting these hypotheses should obviously be noted as well. A quick note on abbreviations. When you use abbreviations in your notes, they need to be defined at their first use. It's pretty much the same as defining abbreviations in a report. All the programs that you use, including their versions, need to be recorded as well, because later versions of that software used for the same analysis might provide different results or additional results and findings because tools improve over time. Lastly, don't go chasing your tail. So we really don't want to be repeating ourselves, repeating analysis that's already been completed or allowing our teams to retread areas we've already covered. That's not efficient. It's not a good use of time. And it means we're not being effective in our note-taking or our analysis. So ensure that you are communicating, you're all on the same page, and your notes enable you to avoid pitfalls like this. So when you take notes, make sure that your notes describe exactly what you're doing and what you're going to want to know in the future, because the one consumer of your notes, every time you write a note while you're doing an investigation, I guarantee you there is at least one consumer, and that's you. You might never share that note with another analyst. You might not actually end up incorporating that note into the report, but at some point later on, you're going to be reviewing your notes, and that note that you've written is for you. So make sure that you document things like what didn't work, but also what did. So every security professional, especially those performing digital forensics, incident response, or related proactive activities, should take contemporaneous notes. This practice is not only in their own best interests, right, in your own best interests, but those of your employers and your stakeholders and your clients as well. The ability to take concise, complete, and accurate notes of actions taken during an engagement should not be underestimated, and it should form part of any standard operating procedures for any security team or security firm. Since the security industry has strong affinity and affiliations with the legal industry and other pretty high stakes verticals like finance and insurance, notes should be insisted upon by stakeholders on all sides of those relationships. While there's no standard method or list of required information when it comes to note-taking, And arguably there should not be, because it'd be too onerous and it'd be too subjective. I urge you to take and insist on contemporaneous notes. The inherent risks of not taking notes are just too significant to ignore. So in conclusion, whether you are a DFIR analyst or a Dachshund owner, taking notes and keeping detailed records is important. By taking notes, you can ensure that we're providing the best possible care for our sausages and gathering evidence that's complete and forensically sound, and that our reports tell the whole story. Thank you for listening.